Bryan ISD School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this workshop has been duly called, and that notice of this workshop has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551. Are there any citizens' comments? No. We'll move straight to the information items then. And let me just start by saying Mark McCall is unable to be here today. He had a death in the family, and so he sends his regrets from the city meeting. So hopefully I can fill in. Our first information item is the 2021-2022 District Calendar Development Update. Matthew LeBlanc.
Hi everyone. Well, as y'all know, Miss Caroline generally does this, but she's unable to be with us today. So I'll let you know I am a duly selected member of the calendar committee and happy to get you updated as well. Right now we're in our survey process for the calendar, so we have had 2 draft options released, and we've asked the public and our teachers and our staff and our students and our parents to all look at those and comment on them and take our survey, so that's ongoing. But I want to update y'all on where we are in this process right now. So just as a reminder, this process is very comprehensive. We have a very large committee that had teachers, support staff, administrators, students, parents. We took all of that feedback, and the committee really worked to put out 2 draft options that had some changes but also met all of the different considerations. Now those key considerations included, of course, the pandemic that we're in. The reading academies, which are coming in for elementary. This is a TEA required reading academy that our pre-K through 4 folks have to go through. And I know Ms. Caroline's talked about that, but that's 60 to 90 hours of professional development that they will have to do. And so philosophically, Bryan ISD believes that that needs to take place while they're on the clock with us. And not all districts do. In some districts, that's going to be an after hours. It's going to be a weekend PD for them. They have this Reading Academy certification. But at Bryan ISD, we really believed it was important, with everything else taxing their time right now, that they do that professional development while they're working for Bryan ISD. And so we took that into consideration, plus some differentiating professional development for our secondary folks. And then, of course, compliance, and you hear this every year, the 75,600 operational minutes. We have to meet that. It's non-negotiable. So here's a quick look at our timeline. You can kind of see the steps that we followed. But as we move into where we are now, we're again in that survey process. And so we'll have our final calendar development meeting after the survey closes, so that'll be February 9th, and then on the 15th, we will bring a calendar to you for approval. Now I'm going to toggle back a couple times here, because you can't tell many differences. And then let me show you what those are. These 2 drafts are very similar, and it's because of all of those different requirements and considerations that I just mentioned. But the main difference is, on draft calendar A, you see that there is professional development student holidays, and on draft calendar B, those days tend to be early releases. And so the question at hand really is, would you rather have a full professional development day, which translates into a student holiday, or would you rather have an early release and the professional development take place after that early release? And both of these calendars meet those operational minutes that we have to meet. So our next steps, of course, if the recommended calendar is approved by you, we will execute our communication plan, which is the same that we've used in years past to make sure that everyone knows this is the calendar. So whether the role is parent, student, teacher, they can start planning for the next school year, because we're getting into that time where all of y'all know you got to start planning for 21-22. Before we go to any questions, I want to remind you and remind everyone else who sees this that our survey is ongoing. It's happening through the 7th. And so we've sent out these draft calendars to all of our staff, to all of our parents, our students. We've also sent out that sheet that I showed you that explained those differences. But you can see all of that at bryanisd.org as well, and then take the survey there. So are there any questions I can answer? Yes, ma'am.
So the question that I'm getting from the surveys is, are we basing this calendar on the assumption that we are 100% in person? Are we going to continue to offer in-person, online, and hybrid? What this calendar looks like is an in-person calendar year? But I'm getting just a lot of questions on what we're thinking.
If I may, sir?
Please.
Ms. Dwayne, your question couldn't be more timely. So actually at the next board meeting, we hope to bring you an update on what Bryan ISD has been working under Dr. Whitbeck's parameters and kind of wishes for next year, is that we do offer some sort of virtual experience for certain selected grade levels, but that it not be in such a way that you're at your traditional campus and you're picking and choosing. That instead you would attend the Bryan ISD's version of a virtual academy if you elect to go to that school. And so giving families a choice while still maintaining the traditional stability of on-campus instruction. And so on the night meeting on the 15th, we hope to bring you a preview of that and what that might look like. It's not without its complexities. Dr. Whitbeck, I'm sure, will be able to give you more background on it, but she's worked with the commissioner to seek, what does that funding look like? There are some statutes that prohibit us from collecting full ADA for a fully online school. I know members of this board was actually on the legislative priority update where we talked a little bit about that, but there are additional complexities that are within the commissioner's control. So what we're looking at essentially is for grades 5 and potentially into high school as well. That's very early in the decision-making tree for that, but that we bring opportunities for them to go to a fully online school should they choose. But we're also looking at some blended type of opportunities for them. So that's all shaping up right now, but for most families, and we see 90% and more of our elementary kids coming on campus, and the numbers keep increasing across all grade levels. I think the lion's share of students will be on campus full-time, and that's what teachers will be doing full-time. I think the real concern here is one that if you're going to be an online student, that you have shown yourself to have good independent learning and good discipline to make sure you're logging into those more synchronous type instruction situations versus asynchronous. You want it to be more of a live session, then you can do it at your own time. This needs to be more like traditional school, but just at a distance. So a preview of what's to come in 2 weeks.
I have a question about that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just think it's remarkable. In answer to Fred's question, we see how much you're looking forward in advance for next year about this. But the idea of students that have logged in, have done well online, how are those, is there a committee that's clued in on that student that's going to be able to say, this is really good for them, they have grandparents who live with them, but she's a very trustworthy student, she's growing up. How will those decisions be made?
So part of the committee that's working right now on the design of a potential virtual academy, which ultimately would come to the board for consideration and discussion, is the profile of a student. And we recognize that it's a good fit for some students, it's not a good fit for all students. And so that committee right now is looking at, okay, are we going to be looking at their course performance and their grades? Are we going to be looking at their past STAR performance, their attendance? And is it going to be on top of a rubric versus an all or nothing, right? Because you might have struggled in one area but excelled in others, and that's to be expected. But can you show, like you suggested, a consistency with logging in and doing work at a distance? And if not, what does it look like for those students? And looking at our current students, and then also looking at students that might move into the area or who are not currently enrolled in Bryan ISD, and what might be a fit for them in the future.
Is this something that the counselors, which I know are right in the middle of all of that, they'll be working on this in the spring? I mean, if it passes and it's put into effect, is it just a whole lot more work for somebody?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think it's different.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
When will the decisions?
We hope to bring to the 15th a preview, and then in early March, final decisions and direction to bring to the board for a recommendation. And so should the board choose to take action, it could launch as early as around spring break.
Okay. Because, like Fran, I've had questions asked to me about that, and I knew it was coming, and so thank you.
Yeah, and to your point, the counselors need to know because they're placing kids in classes, right? So we need to know if you're interested in the virtual school, then that's a different scenario for you. Absolutely.
I would not expect, I would tell the board, don't expect that our plan will include elementary, because right now the parameters forbid anything third grade and under anyway. It's only above that. So when you look at our schools being up to 4th grade, we just feel like we're going to try this. We're going to try it starting at 5th and up. And also that 91% of our elementary kids are already back. And so by the time August comes, we would predict even more will feel comfortable coming back. But the complications are many for some of the reasons Dr. Ibarra mentioned and others, not just the funding, but there's parameters on how many hours per day. There's just a lot of detail. And so we're really exploring that. What we would like to have happen is that the commissioner would grant the same latitude that we've had this year with providing online learning in terms of all day and the funding that we currently have. We don't know whether that will happen or not. And so, we're trying to measure out everything, communicate, get our facts, but we also don't want to see our teachers having dual responsibility. There would be a responsibility that you would be a part of teaching in a virtual academy or you would not. And that would be more divided. And certainly there's room for those who wish to and be compensated, that might happen. But other than that, we are not looking to duplicate what we currently have. We want to see a separation. So those are just some talking points before the 15th.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, sorry. I did take my vitamins earlier today. Okay, on the calendar B, you have 2 days built in that can be comp days. But then that calendar is the one with the early release days. So how the committee, I've been on that committee before, and I know there's a lot of people with a lot of different ideas about it. But are those 2 comp days a consensus with the committee? And they're only on one calendar and not on the other?
So those comp days allow us a little bit so because that's early releases and not full PD, we have more minutes to work with on that, more instructional minutes, because they're in those half days. And so those comp days are in place in case we have weather to make up.
I know how difficult it is on a campus at any level to have an early release, because there's always something that happens right before it's all said and done. The kids are still on campus, don't have a ride, get in trouble, you're looking for kids. So it kind of takes away from the idea of having a good, calm professional development after an early release. So is that why it's on Plan B?
Well, I think mainly it's on Plan B because we have more minutes to work with on Plan B. And so we needed to have a couple of days in there that could substitute for weather days if needed. But I think one thing that we've learned really well this year is we can get students into a good routine with the early release.
Yeah,
that allows those teachers to transition to professional development very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I did have a question about that, but I wondered what our feedback was on doing the early release, like we did this year on those primarily on the Wednesdays every week. It's kind of surprised me that we didn't have an option with that, so I wondered if the feedback was more negative or was just too difficult to do.
I believe that in the development of the calendar, you remember that the elementary level only got released an hour. And that is not sufficient for reading academies.
Okay.
So the high school feedback is positive about the early release on Wednesdays. In middle school too, I believe, because they have a larger chunk of time. But with the elementaries and the minutes, it was not possible to do that. So now when we develop a new calendar, knowing that those teachers have to have 63 plus hours of PD, you can't do it an hour a week. You have to have longer chunks of time because they're actually modules that they have to learn, and those modules are at least 3 hours, I believe. Some of them are longer and all day, and we'll use the full day PDs for those. So that was the reading academies are a driving force behind this calendar. So
That makes sense.
does that make sense?
Yeah. So maybe after reading academies are over, we'll revisit the early stuff for high school.
And we know that every year, as the calendar development takes place, that's something that comes in and that we've looked at. So situationally, it'll be different after the reading academies are done too, and hopefully COVID's done too.
And I may have missed this, and maybe we haven't decided yet, but I know at middle and high school, we've been doing block schedule. Is that something we'll think about, or is that off topic? Sorry.
Yes, that is currently being reviewed by a district committee, but also looking at the teacher input from the surveys from the fall. When we did that survey, we actually put out to all teachers at those levels narrative responses, so they could give us everything maybe we didn't consider on a radial button kind of feedback item. And using that information from teachers, honestly, it was very mixed. Lots of positives, lots of things to improve, and truthfully, there should be things to improve. It's our first time to use block scheduling, right? So right now the committee is looking at that information. We're proposing scenarios based on course registrations and knowing what students have selected. We're also looking at, Dr. Whitbeck has mentioned a modified block in the past, and looking at what, if we did modified block, what courses we've included that they would meet every day versus those that would meet every other day.
I like that.
And I know Dr. Merrill's also looked at some creative scheduling where one day a week might be a full 8-period day schedule. Very similar to what Bryan Collegiate is currently doing, where they have a block schedule Monday through Thursday, and then all classes meet on Friday, but maybe a different day for those schools. So looking at how can we make the best of both worlds and accomplish what we need to for students. So that is under review. We are going to be seeking administrator feedback. I know Dr. Whitbeck did that just last week with high school principals and assistant principals, and hopefully have that decision and different models after the calendar is set.
Awesome. Sorry.
Part of the consideration, so to give you two examples, fine arts teachers have more concern with it because to have a double amount of time to, work on your trumpet or singing and things like that can be a little taxing on kids and directors. But yet maybe a science teacher that is very lab-based really loves it because of the complexity of setting up the lab. And this is not new to block schedule discussion. This is going way back, when I was a principal, we heard the same kinds of concerns. And that's why many people did look at things that were called like modified block. We also have a staffing implication and the money behind it, like to truly engage in it purposefully in a modified block. What does that look like in terms of staffing? Does it look like more teacher units? What is the cost associated with that? Those are all the things that the team is working on to be able to bring you back a sound plan.
And if I may, Dr. Whitbeck, to piggyback on that, if you'll remember, the board approved, and we're very grateful, Cardonix, which
Ask about that. If that's
which will be-
helping make those decisions.
yes, that's exactly what we needed to help make the best decision. And so course requests are flowing in right now into the database, and Cardonix will be a part of what does that really look like and shake out to be as we move forward.
I know that we're taking STAR and we're taking it in person. Of course, it's not going to happen until after a lot of these things are decided. But if we do have something like a block, can we find the kids that are really in need of recuperation of whatever it is and work them next year into a schedule like that? Because we're going to, I'm sure we'll find where a lot of kids have a lot of needs, and we can build in some, not tutoring, but literally teaching. And won't that work better in a block schedule?
I think there are pros and cons to both, but yes, if we're able to capture some uninterrupted time, for example, for students who might be recouping credits, uninterrupted time in a duration, it can be very beneficial if the student is focused and keeps consistent. Some it might be too long and we might have to mix up the activities or maybe the courses they're working on during that large time frame. But I think there's a lot of ways to win there, and a lot of things the campuses are doing right now to get ahead of those issues with students who need a little extra help or need to recoup some unfinished learning from the fall semester or even from the prior school year. What can we do to help them? So a lot of that's happening right now, but certainly it'll definitely play into the master schedule if the student needs to retake a course.
one of the things that you're talking about is exactly what the principals are doing on each of the campuses. So we've got our repair underway that started from the first semester. And so it's really become instrumental in coordinating with our counselors to make sure we stay on track to graduate. So what you talked about is the those cracks that have opened up to some degree when they're staying home, or they're in person, or they're back and forth. There's unfortunately more opportunity for those kids to kind of just fall through the cracks. And so we don't want that, clearly. And one of the things that we've had to talk about, and that the principals have been really on top of, is not only what we do with MC Harris, that's Crystal and Karen have done a phenomenal job there, but then you've also got credit recovery, you've got 6 weeks grade repair, you've got all kinds of avenues that you're trying to make those kids up, and then to layer on top of that, you've got some that are staying home. So if they're staying home, how what applies to them? And I would say that it's been really great to watch the campuses work with those kids that are being maybe have a great opportunity to improve their grades. Because we started at one point at the end of the semester, and then it's cleaned up tremendously. Like that number went from like a gut punch to it really started to clean up. So getting a firm number took just about a week or 10 days or a little bit longer to find out really where are we. And so to some degree it was like a wake-up call with the 6 weeks time. I would say that that's the reason we didn't do the cancellation of Return to Learn. We did that with the elementary campuses. We've kind of waited just a little bit with the high school so that could set in and we could truly find out what that real number is. And so that process, Crystal and I have been going through those appeals for the elementaries, and the high schools are starting to come as well. So all of that is a factor in trying to figure out, make sure that we stay on track to graduate, because it's across the state, we're seeing numbers that we've never seen before. Kids they're not disappearing, we don't see them on a daily basis because maybe they've chosen to stay home, or they're a hybrid or whatever. So trying to go out and kind of reestablish those connections is really, really important. So yes, to answer your question, absolutely. So whatever schedule we do, we have to get it in front of our counselors, because they're really the boots on the ground. They're the ones making the decisions for the interventions. So there are benefits to both, but we need to make sure they have ample opportunity to be able to plug them in. The 8-period day helps. However we implement an 8-period day, whether it's a block, a modified block, or whatever, it gives our counselors that extra period for those kids that are behind. Yep. So that decision that we made last year, for many other reasons, not just simply because of credit recovery or credit fixing or whatever you want to call it, there's also benefits to CTE, and then also advanced academics kids taking an extra dual credit class or IB course or whatever. So it just gives them a better chance.
Thank you.
Yep.
We look forward to hearing feedback from the results of the survey, and the administration will return on February 15th to ask us to consider approval of the recommended calendar.
Thank y'all so much. Appreciate it.
Next, another information item is overview of the teacher incentive allotment with Dr. Ibarra and Ms. Jean.
Thank you, Dr. Harlan. Okay, so I have good news, and I have news that's going to require a great deal of discussion. But it's still good news. It's still good news. So the teacher incentive allotment, this is an overview. It's a very basic overview. I'm going to tell you about what our process is and when you can expect to see some decisions and recommendations from the district to come before the board. But first, what is the teacher incentive allotment? The teacher incentive allotment was part of House Bill 3 in the last legislative session. And part of that was basically merit-based pay for teachers. Now, the state will tell you it is optional to participate, and in terms of giving teachers designations, which we're going to talk about, it is optional. However, every district has to make the decision on what happens with those funds when a designated teacher is hired by the district and they come from the state, okay? So while it's optional, it's really not optional. You still have to have a plan, okay? So we are actually in cohort D. And cohort D means that we are starting right now on our application, and our application is due April 15th to the state of Texas for discussion, consideration, and feedback, okay? What that means for us is that TEA is looking to reward, retain, and recruit teachers to the districts who have the highest poverty or who have a rural status. And so that threshold kind of changes based on the types of students you serve and what their needs are and where you serve them, if you're rural or if you're urban. But additionally, with this comes funding from the state directly to designated where campuses where designated teachers work. And the idea is that a teacher could earn essentially a 6-figure salary and stay in the classroom. So that's how it was started, right? So how does it come to fruition, right? Because that's exciting, right? If we can recruit the best of the best and our teachers are compensated for the work that they do and the outcomes they achieve with their students, that's pretty exciting. So they established 3 levels. There's recognized, exemplary, and master designations. And we'll talk later about how you get one of those designations, but essentially TEA says that approximately 33% of the teachers in the state of Texas are probably eligible to be recognized. Another 20% exemplary, and 5% master level designation. So, based on the rule status or the eco-dis of the campus, those 2 things in combination, there's a fantastic formula, and it comes out with what type of funding you would receive at the campus level where that teacher works for those levels of designation. So if a teacher is designated as recognized, then the campus and the district would receive between an additional $3,000 to $9,000 annually for that teacher. If they're exemplary designated, between $6,000 and $18,000, and if they're master's level designated, between $12,000 and $32,000 annually for that one designated teacher. So that's a lot of money, right? So what comes with this is the decision, and this is what all districts have to decide regardless of if they're going to do the designations. What happens with those funds? Up to 10% can be reserved at the district level for oversight, and you'll understand why as we go through the presentation, instruments for assessment of student growth, and also to possibly compensate other groups of professionals who aren't included in the designation system. At least 90% must go to the campus where the designated teacher works. Now, of that 90%, the question before the strategic planning committee at the district level is what percent goes directly to the designated teacher and what percent is divided out among the other teachers at the campus who also contribute to the overall growth of a child. That can be, that can generate a lot of discussion, right? So those are the things we have to decide as we move forward. And there's a strategic planning committee at the district level that I'll talk about in a little bit that's going to work with that particular issue. Because that's a big deal. And that 90% must go to teachers at the campus. So it doesn't say anything other than it must go to teachers. So the 10% can go to other staff members, instructional aides, administrators, counselors, instructional coaches, but 90%, at least 90% must go to the teachers at the campus where the designated teacher works and serves. Now, this is why it's a really good thing for our district, aside from just the good news of additional funding coming into the district, it's funding for our teachers. If you look at the designations across the screen there by campus, you can see the range at which the campus would receive, the district would receive funding for the different levels of those designations. So recognized teacher at Jones Elementary would make an additional, well, the campus and the district would receive $7,962, and then that 90-10 split has to happen however we decide to make it happen. And master's level, all the way on the far right, $28,540 annually. So these are pretty significant funds that could do quite a bit of good in properly compensating our teachers and staff who are effective with students and help them retain and recruit them to where they can best serve students. So we're excited about all of that, but we still have the 90-10 split to determine. You have to be very careful in how you proceed, and so the committee is working through that process in the coming weeks to kind of look at what might that look like for Bryan ISD. The designation travels with the teacher. This is important when we think about that 90-10 split, because if we hire a teacher from an outside district who holds that designation, it comes with them. And so when they come into a school and the designation travels with them, does the 90-10 split go to people they've never met before? Or are they all part of the team? Because the teacher will hold that designation for 5 years. It'll be on their certificate. It cannot be revoked. It can be increased. If I started as a recognized designated teacher and then the subsequent year I showed the numbers to be elevated to exemplary or masters, it can get better, but it cannot go the other way. You can change your teaching assignment. You can change your grade level assignment. You could teach in a totally different subject and area, for example, elementary, who have a self-contained certificate. Perhaps they attained the designation in a prior district under third grade ELA. In the new district, because they were looking for that chart that I showed before, what were the designation payouts by campus, right? I'm going to teach third grade math now. That's okay. Doesn't change your designation. So those funds still come with you, they still travel with you. And I'm going to back up one slide because there was something I neglected to discuss earlier that's important. On this slide right here, these are when a district makes the designation, but there's another way to become designated in the state of Texas. And that's to that fine little notation right there. Teachers with national board certification are eligible basically for a recognized designation. So the national board certification takes 1 to 2 years to complete, but if any teacher holds that designation, regardless of their teaching assignment, they automatically are able to be submitted as a recognized teacher to receive the funding. And likewise, reinvest each time they have to renew that certificate. Additionally, TEA will reimburse districts for the cost of that certification. So that helps too. So let me go back forward. I know it's a little confusing. There's quite a bit to TIA. But the good news is it travels with the teacher, so that's great for recruitment. That's great for recruitment. When HR goes out, once we make our plan and we decide that 90-10 split, we can give actual number of direct payout to teachers based on your designation to recruit you to come to schools in Bryan ISD and which schools, and to really retain some of our staff that are purely fantastic. So the good news. So eligibility. To put someone forward as a designation, they have to be a teacher. And very specifically, they have to be coded in PEIMS as 087. Now, there are very strict rules with how you code in PEIMS. And in fact, I think it's a federal offense, or it's a state offense now if you falsify those numbers. So that's good news, right? Our data is absolutely accurate in that area. So teachers basically have to have students on their roster. They have to be a teacher of record for at least 50% of the day. And they'd still receive the full designation and corresponding funding that comes with it. This will be important later, 50% of the day. And they must be in an identified eligible subject and grade area. By that it means if we propose our plan for how we will designate teachers, it has to be one of the ones the district has selected that we're going to put forward for designations. So you might be thinking, well, why don't you put forward all these teachers for designations? Why don't you do that? Well, there are rules to how you designate teachers. And the first one is that you must have a reliable and valid student growth measure in that subject and grade. And then you also must submit their T-test evaluation. T-test has been in the district since its inception, no problem there. Student growth measures, right now we do get a growth measure on STAR, and it's only in certain grades and levels and subjects. And so we have to be, and truly we know now there was no STAR test last year, and so a growth measure is unlikely to be helpful right now, and certainly uncertain. So the growth measure can come from other processes. For example, many districts are seeking more nationally normed type student assessments. You might have heard of several of them. NWE's MAP, Measures of Academic Progress. It is one that has been around for a very long time and provides reliable growth measures. And they have to be right. And here's why. What happens when the district submits their data sets, they submit it to Texas Tech. They submit all of the teachers that they're putting forward for a designation. They submit the T-test score and the student growth measure. And if they have those others on the may side, they include those as well, the may include, okay? But they submit all the data they're putting forward for the designation. And they also submit another file of everyone who was eligible, one of the grades and subjects the district selected. They submit all of their data, even if they're not putting forward for a designation. If that data doesn't match up in terms of you've got perhaps a growth measure that doesn't look consistent with the evaluation, they will reject all designations, even the ones that do show to be valid because your data is inconsistent. This is a big deal. And let me say, I'm going to keep going. I know I'm going the lightning speed, but this is the dunking, the quick one, right? So let me come back to it. This timeline. Right now, we did core strategic planning team. We've been doing that for several months. We're engaging with a larger strategic planning committee, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, as well as focus groups. And then we'll bring it back to the board and focus. But just follow me real quickly beyond there. In In April, we're going to submit our application. In August, TEA will say yes or no to our application. And then next school year, this is very important, is data collection year. Next school year, if they approve it for all of the grades and subjects that we say we're going to look at for designations, then we have to submit all of the t-tests and all of the student growth measures and any other indicators we put in there, okay? That's all next year. But watch that calendar. Next year ends. In November of the following school year, we submit that data to Texas Tech. They look at it, they work with it, and then in April, that next spring, again, we're into the next school year, 2023, they tell us whether or not it was accepted. There's a double pass. You have to pass the application, you have to pass the data every single time. So, theoretically, we could be telling teachers in November, we're very excited, we're putting you forward for designation of X. And Texas Tech could come back and reject all of the data sets. Technically, it's TEA that would reject it, based on Texas Tech's report and interpretation of our data set, which means that would put us behind by about 2 years in teachers getting designated. So the process is very lengthy, it's very serious, but the good news is, if that all worked out, then in 2023 would be teacher payouts. And perhaps sooner with finance, Mr. Beesall will have to save me on this one. There's settle up you can do, so you pay them in the actual year and you settle up in the September 2023. So those things can happen too. But the timeline is very important. And what we're finding with most districts who have gone through this process successfully is they started with a core group of teachers where they had a valid and reliable student growth measure. They didn't go beyond there in year one. After they got designations rolling, they then branched out over that year of data collection. They then started working on the creation of pre and post tests that were reliable and valid for those other areas of service. It's a little more challenging to create a student growth measure that's reliable and valid for elementary PE, right? Or for elementary music. Those tests don't typically exist as pre and post tests in a lot of these courses. So that whole timeline and process is set by TEA and in conjunction with Texas Tech, and it is outside of our sphere of control. But what we do know is that as we design our system, there are key things we need to make sure that we have in place. One, obviously, t-tests. We must have great calibration of our appraisers. When one appraiser goes in the room and then another appraiser goes in the room, they see the same thing at the same level. That'll be very important to our data passing the second data test, right? And then we must have a reliable and valid student growth measure. There are things that we can utilize that are in place. For example, Circle for our pre-K students. We already have that in place. Most districts are using Circle for the pre-K student population. So that's great news, right? And then we need to look at, are there any other components that the committee would like to include in our particular plan? And looking at a large number of them now across the state, most are sticking primarily, not exclusively, with t-tests and a student growth measure. If they're including things like teacher leadership, then that's another little piece, but it's typically like a 5% of the overall weighting of the rubric. How do you weight the rubric? How much is t-test? How much is student growth? All of that is up to the district. There is not a one-size-fits-all. Every district is creating their own plan from scratch to meet these measures. So, the good news is we have a very great group of people who have volunteered to go on this journey with us. The vast majority are teachers, and you can see the campuses they represent, and then also the appropriate district staff who would have to help make all of this happen. But this committee is working with, we've hired a technical advisory consultant that's approved by TEA, Dr. Tammy Cruz. You might remember her. She has worked with the district back in the years of the early 2000s under the Teacher Advancement Program, the TAP program. She actually ran that at the state level with working with many districts on teacher incentive pay. And so the good news is she has a great background in this, and she's written the plans and worked with districts to facilitate that conversation and has been successful at applications being approved. She's also working with districts from Cohort A whose data was rejected. She said about 75% of the data sets that were submitted were accepted, but 25% were rejected. And so those districts are behind by 2 and 3 years now in terms of their designations. So best of both worlds is what we would like, right? while we work on this plan and we work on designations of teachers by whatever grade subjects we select as a team, we are also simultaneously researching how to support teachers through the National Board Certification process. So that one of the services we provide to our teachers is come learn with us, grow with us, and obtain a board certification where you can be appropriately compensated. So that's another investment piece that we're looking at. Alongside this committee, throughout the month and the weeks ahead, we will be pulling together various focus groups of teachers. These are a few of those individuals that have already been selected by their campuses for particular topics. So when the committee is grappling with a particular issue, we'll pull this focus group together and ask them their thoughts to weigh in to inform the strategic planning committee. But very much a large amount of teacher input is required for this to be successful, and then communication. So going back to our timeline, we'd like to bring back another update at the February 15th board meeting. And then in early March, that first meeting, bring to you our application and the design of the plan. Following that, we would like to go to every campus and explain what those parameters are so teachers are fully informed and all other support staff are fully informed about what that plan looks like. Because also on April 15th, after we submit our application, Texas Tech will send a survey to all of our teachers to ascertain whether or not we had transparent processes and a good buy-in process. So we want to do our best to actually uphold that all along, but it'll be good information for us to see how teachers felt we did with this whole process. So that was a whole lot in a very short period of time. Any questions?
Yes, I have promise. But they won't all take, I mean, some we can talk about too. But,
Certainly.
okay, is Carol, and particularly the certification part of her department, are they getting a raise? Like, now?
No.
That's to be determined.
Other meetings as a sign, yeah.
Which leads me to the next question is, with this much data input and this much keen detail, who does all that?
So that's part of what TEA designed that up to 10% for. You can hire staff as needed to do this. There are different reports you send to Texas Tech. There's something called a winter roster, and then there's all these other data sets you submit to Texas Tech. You have to calculate them based on a rubric, so it's just not a flat score. It's if I'm a teacher and I want to get the student growth criteria, a recognized teacher has 55% of their students meeting or exceeding growth. That's a state expectation. They've already said it. So that threshold's done. So if they're at that level, then they get so many points on the recognized level, right? And then there's an exemplary cut at 60, and I think next one's 65. I looked at it this morning. So all of those come into points, where you get points on a scale of maybe 1 to 10, whatever
So
you
does
create.
it start with the teacher submitting an application?
No, it starts with the district pulling all of the data. Every teacher gets submitted who's in an eligible grade and subject. And this is, and Mrs. Waller, this is a good point. We have B tests, right? Where we have those teachers who we've shown to be effective teachers over the years. And so they have their 45-minute, they still do a summative appraisal, but their 45-minute observation is waived. And for 3 years. And then every 3 years, they come back into the cycle. If a teacher is teaching in one of these designated subjects that we've created, they must have an evaluation. And so the district actually has to pull all of that data for all eligible teachers and submit all eligible teachers whether or not they meet the designation criteria. Because they're going to look at the who meets and who doesn't meet and see if those data sets are comparable and that it correlates.
Okay, 2 more and then I'll ask the rest of them to you personally. Okay, what about some of these teachers that actually will be positively affected by this, will be making more than some of their administrators?
Yes, ma'am.
So what happens to the administrator salaries and those that don't have the opportunity to be involved in this?
That's a great question, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. You'll hear back to
Well, let me say this. We obviously have an instructional coaching workforce that are truly masterful at instruction, at coaching, and at working with students and teachers. I worked with that particular group of individuals last Friday and did a slower version of this presentation. And we discussed, how might the model shift, right? Perhaps you're 50% with class roster and 50% with instructional coaching. And that would put you in the designation to be eligible. So how might it be redesigned? And you know, one of the things that we came away with from that conversation is, while these are changes and difficult, it's never a problem to have your best in front of kids. And so we're gonna work it. We're gonna work it out. We're gonna make it work. We're gonna find a way. And then ultimately people have choice.
And then what if the state goes broke?
I'm gonna kick that one to Dr. Whitbeck.
I mean, that's just it. You know, what if we have a catastrophe like we've had these last 10, 12 months?
I do know that last week I attended virtually the TASA legislative briefing, and we asked that very question with in relation to TIA. What does the funding look like for TIA, and is it stable? And they said there is absolutely no discussion of removing TIA, and that they fully expect House Bill 3 to be funded. That's the word right now. So.
In everything that we've attended, including some legislators that actually spoke to superintendent meeting I was in, on the finance committee. They feel as though because it's a $1 billion shortfall now instead of a $4 billion, which was earlier predicted by the comptroller, that it can be absorbed through some departmental cuts, but that House Bill 3 would remain intact, which is where this is coming from. But just to mention when Dr. Ibarra explained to you that part of the decision is, does the teacher take the 90% in full, the actual classroom teacher of record, or does the teacher take 75%, 15% is divided out among those other teachers and other people who support, those assistant principals, those music teachers, all of that has to be figured out. But you have to also make it so that it is good for the teacher of record, and if you dilute it too much, how far do you go to where even those that are also getting a little bit are getting such a small amount that it doesn't really make much of an impact. So it's like finding the sweet spot for what is workable and also what makes a difference to, first and foremost, that teacher, but to all the others. So it's a very complicated process, and it's literally juggling it. But I would like you to go back to the cost, or the awarded monies. And I want to just make one point, and I don't think you said it, and if you did, I apologize. This is unique to Bryan ISD, okay? So the numbers are based on the students and the amount of children on free and reduced price lunch. You can see quite a disparity. Look at Sam Houston's master teacher versus Jones Elementary master teacher. So not only will we have choices and differences within our own district, but this would be true if you were to look at Navasota ISD or Conroe ISD or any other ISD, you would see very different numbers. So it is unique to us. And I will also want to compliment Dr. Ibarra and all of the senior leaders who have been spending a lot of time on this. It is a very difficult time while we're dealing with a pandemic to also be trying to plan out something as complicated as TIA. And so when faced with, well, do we just push it off and join another cohort and wait another year? That looks real nice when it's a lot of devil in the detail. But in reality, to not put money in front of our teachers when you already know it's getting pushed out just by the nature of the system, to not put money in the hands of the teachers as soon as you possibly can, was not the desire of the leadership. Everyone wants to do the work that's going to end up benefiting them. So just to point that out and to also say thank you, Dr. Barr.
It's a team for sure. Mrs. Kuhn is my partner in crime.
And to be doing this while we're also trying to wrestle with reading academies is to be commended.
And developing a virtual academy.
Yeah.
Never a dull moment.
Good work.
Thank you. We'll be bringing you more information and progress from the committee, but certainly if you have any questions, please feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we move into business services, and the first is consider approval of bus purchase. Vicky Johnson and Warren Jones.
Good afternoon. I'm coming today to talk to you about hopefully purchasing some new buses that are always badly needed because they wear out every year. But also want to thank the board and the superintendent for the last several years of aggressive purchasing. When I first started here, we were probably 50 or 60 buses behind in our purchasing. If you could maybe just flip to the spreadsheet real quick with this.
Sure.
You see on the 15 years or older, it shows 21 buses currently outside of our 15-year cycle. 4 years ago, we were probably around 60 buses outside of that cycle. So over the last several years, we've really done a really great job of playing catch up on that. And so because of that, we've dramatically reduced the amount of emergency recoveries we do. Those are like when we have to drive to Waco in the middle of the night because Lane Boobin's calling me and saying there's a bus broke down at 1 a.m. We haven't had those things happen. And it's because of these new buses, because we assign new buses to those trips. Anytime a bus goes out of town, we make sure our kids are on brand new buses. And that's been a lifesaver for all of us. So as we move forward, it's our plan to be able to maintain this kind of purchasing cycle. This 10 to 12 buses a year will get us to be able to maintain a 12 to 15 year replacement cycle so that we'll always have new buses every 12 to 15 years. And with maybe buying 1 or 2 extras each year so that we can make up that 21 buses that we still have that are currently outside of that replacement cycle. If you look on there, you'll see that over the years there are some gaps in there where there were no buses purchased. You can definitely look like around the time of the financial crisis where there were gaps in 2008 and 9 where certain types of buses weren't purchased, like 2011 and 12, no buses purchased. There will be years where it seems like we'll have to buy more buses to make up for those. You don't want to have huge bus years where you buy 20 or 30 buses because at some point down the road you'll end up having to make up for that. You'll have those that'll come out. So having that 10 to 12 buses a year purchase will make it so that we can always just kind of budget each year for that out of our operating budget or bond funds like we're hopefully going to do this time. If we go to the next slide. This is the planned purchase for this year. This is 6 route buses. Now, one of the things that has happened over the years is as they keep increasing and making our buses safer and safer, one of the things that they've done is they've made the seats thicker and thicker. So now when you get inside of a bus and you sit down in them, for a high school student to sit down, there's no room for them. So one of the things we've done this year is we've purchased 78 passenger buses seated to 72. So they'll actually only fit 72 kids. So they've taken a bus that's long enough for 78, but only put in the seats for 72 so so high school kids will have about an extra inch of room between their back and their knees so they can actually fit in there and sit. So it does make a huge difference for the kids to be able to sit in there for our high school and middle school kids because we have a lot of really tall kids. Anyways, and then also a couple of buses that will be designated for trips that will have understorage as well as overhead storage. We got with athletics and some of the coaches, and they would really like to see some overhead racks as well as some more understorage on buses. So we've ordered and quoted those. We're still in need of more sped buses. Always in need of more sped buses. They get the most wear and tear. They drive the most miles. The lifts wear out on those after about 8 to 10 years, so we constantly are doing maintenance on those. So it's always good for us to have spares, a few extra spares on the sped buses because of that. They're harder to get parts and replacements for. They're down longer. And then the Type A minibus, which is the 14 passenger, which is, if you remember, just a couple months ago we had the one that got rear-ended. It was totaled out. And that one is actually going to be replaced. We've already been, I think we've already been paid for that one on insurance. And anyways, so we're going to replace that one as well. They're great for going into streets with cul-de-sacs and stuff like that. They're really versatile. We use them on routes and for sped. Anyways, so that's what we're looking at purchasing. If you have any questions about any of those purchases, I'd be happy to answer. Okay,
Any questions?
perfect.
And this does require a motion for approval.
I move approval of the bus purchase in the amount of $1,095,746 as presented.
Okay. It has been moved by Ms. Blaine and second by Dr. Davis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, the motion is approved.
Thank you.
Okay, next we are moving to local governance and the appointment of single-member District Place 5 trustee. And just as a reminder, this is a statement that Mr. McCall has prepared, but I'm reading it on his behalf. So the next item, as a reminder, Dr. Doug Wannenberger vacated the seat after building a home in another part of Bryan ISD in the fall. This appointment will fill the seat for a short period of time until an election can take place in November. From the beginning, our effort to fill this vacancy has been very open, thorough, and transparent. In keeping with this, I want to walk you through how we got to today's appointment. Initially, our board president, Mark McCall, reached out to qualified candidates that currently serve on Bryan ISD committees. Due to personal obligations and life events, these individuals were unable to fill the position. When we were unable to fill the position from that candidate pool, we made a highly publicized call for anyone interested in single-member District 5 to apply for the vacancy. We received 10 applications. However, several of these applications did not qualify because they did not live in Place 5, meet the age requirement, or they were employed by Bryan ISD or related to someone who is, which is not permitted. Out of the group that did qualify, the board selected 3 finalists to interview with the board executive committee. One of these individuals withdrew her name from consideration during the interview phase due to a possible job relocation. Out of the remaining 2 finalists, our board of trustees believes David Stasny is the best choice to fill the seat until the November election. As we've been very transparent during this entire process, I want to explain in part how we came to our decision. The expectations of a school board member include over 12 hours of training within the first 120 days, and it normally takes 6 to 12 months for a new board member to get fully up to speed. Mr. Stasny's willingness to fill in during this short appointment ensures that we have a highly qualified interim board member in place to advocate on behalf of the Bryan ISD students, faculty, and staff. Therefore, on behalf of Board President Mark McCall, I, Julie Harlan, appoint David Stasny to fill the single-member District Place 5 position until the next normal school board election in November of 2021. Okay, we will now move into closed session. So go ahead and do that. So if we can. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm new with this. Thanks for that. The board will now convene in closed session to discuss the following items as allowed by the Texas Government Code Chapter 551. No voting will take place in the closed meeting. Any action the board wishes to take as a result of discussion in closed session will take place after the board reconvenes in the open meeting. It is now 1 o'clock. Hang on. The board will need to discuss section 551.074 and section 551.072. Are we on?
Oh, and we have to talk.
The board reconvened in open session at 2:16 PM. No action was taken in closed session. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting's adjourned.